You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarbett, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Hello and welcome back to That Music Podcast. I am super excited today to go and talk about something that actually really makes our life a lot simpler, which is reusing and refreshing lesson plans from previous years. So I'm going to start off by saying, first year teachers, sorry, this isn't going to be super helpful, but what I will do is I'm going to share some tips for what you can do in your first year to really make sure that you are set up for success. So at least you don't have to start from complete scratch when you get into year two. So what do I mean when I'm talking about reusing and refreshing lesson plans? So first of all, I really don't think that you should be writing brand new lesson plans every single day, every single year. I think that when you're reinventing the wheel constantly, you're never able to iterate and really make it kind of in your secret sauce and really make it that like perfect, exactly what you want. But on the flip side of that, I don't think that we should be doing the same lesson plans like exactly as written every single year, because as Anne Mileski says, teaching is situational, time-bound, and ever-changing. So we really can't do last year's lesson plan and expect it to go exactly how it did last year. So how do we find that middle point? How do we find the perfect balance between reusing and refreshing? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to start off by saying my first year of teaching, I did a lot of things wrong, but I definitely did some things right. I've talked about this before, but one of the biggest things that I did my first year of teaching to help second year teacher Bryson was to just simply keep a list of songs that the kids knew. So that, you know, if we did Mouse Mousey in kindergarten, I would write it down and said, kindergarten Mouse Mousey. That way I know that when I'm going into, not only when I'm doing my kindergarten lesson plans that year, but when I start making lesson plans in first grade, I know what repertoire they already know. Because there's nothing worse than saying, all right, we're going to learn a brand new song, and it's a song they already know. So that's something that I think that you can start off, even if you're just starting off now, it's January, you know, doing exactly what you need to do, and just write down what you're working on, and that'll make it easier when you go back next year to see what repertoire you've done. So what do you do if you have a little bit of let's call it a backlog of lesson plans, and you're really thinking, all right, I definitely want to refresh these. I don't want to just, do them again exactly the way they are, but I also want to get the most bang for my buck with my time. And what I would urge you to do is first take a step back. When you're writing lesson plans, think about future self. Think about your future self and make them specific. I'm not saying write out like one of the 4 or 5 page lesson plans like we had to do in college that no one ever does in the real world. But I want you to be specific in what you're using, how you're using it, and what materials. For instance, if you have a book in your lesson plan, don't just put book or frog book, put the name of the book, put the author. That way you can find it the next year. But I think it's also important for you to, even if the way your brain works and you lesson plans, that's fine. But I would also number your lesson plans, because we all know that lesson plans can get off, and we might have one class that's ahead of the other. So I find rather than doing date lesson plans, like all right, this is what we're going to do on October 30th or whatever, is all right, this is the 7th time I see these kids, we're going to do this. And so when I do is I go in when I'm lesson planning and I have my new lesson plans, and I also have a binder of previous year's lesson plans. Usually I only look at the previous years. The other ones, they're there somewhere, but I don't really go in and look at them. So what I do is, all right, let's say I'm working on my 10th lesson plan for kindergarten. I go in and I see, all right, what did we do last year in kindergarten during the 10th rotation? That is always where I start, seeing what we did last year. And there are going to be some things that really resonate with me, like, oh, I totally forgot about that song, or I totally forgot about that game, or, ooh, I forgot I have those manipulatives in the back of my closet. But there's also a lot of times where I'm like, oh my God, that game nobody liked it, or, that song just would never die. So I'm going to basically keep the same framework of my lesson from the previous year and really build upon it. So take out things that I think we can improve on, and then add things in that maybe I found at a PD, or some new repertoire that I found, or something like that. So basically kind of supplement rather than start from scratch. So how do you know when you should start from scratch? I will be very honest. My first year of teaching, like I said, I was surviving. I did what I could to survive, and I did what I could to set myself up the next year. My second year of teaching, I really did not like my lesson plans. Part of that is my first year of teaching, I started my master's degree and my Code levels, so I had a little bit of a different understanding going into my second year. But I also just realized that a lot of the lessons they weren't good. And like, I have no problem saying that, because I was still learning how to develop curriculum. And so that specific time, I used the lessons kind of as more of a collection of repertoire and ideas, rather than we're going to recreate and refresh this sequence. Once I had a couple of years in and I was really able to feel like I at least kind of was on the right path, at least, that's when I started kind of working on the refreshing a little bit rather than completely starting from scratch. All right, so you're listening to this podcast on the way to work. You're ready to put some things into act. How do you get it? I would first, if you have old lesson plans from previous years, dig them out, take a look at them, see if you can figure out at least where you were in the year. So if you haven't necessarily labeled or dated your lesson plans, see you can do to kind of figure out where those, where you are kind of similar between the 2 years, and see if at least there's some ideas that you can use. You don't necessarily need to start from scratch, like I said, and you definitely don't need to completely reuse a lesson plan from previous years. But the first thing I want you to do, your first kind of little action item, is to just give it a shot and look at what you have and to see how much time that can save you. One of the things that I do, and when I talk to especially newer teachers, and they say, I feel like I am spending all of my time lesson planning, or I don't have enough time to develop curriculum for all of these grades. And yes, that is a very real thing that we have to deal with as music educators, specifically elementary music educators, because in my case, I'm developing curriculum for first grade, kindergarten, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, choir. All of those things I am developing this curriculum, and that is not an uncommon thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the double-edged sword where we get to develop our own curriculum, but it does take a lot of time. So when I'm talking with teachers, when I'm coaching teachers about how to reclaim your time and make your instruction better without making your brain go explosion, is how can we save time lesson planning? One thing you can do is reusing and refreshing rather than starting from scratch. Another thing that you can do is really utilizing, figuring out how you can build upon not only the previous year's lesson, but the previous lesson in general. You don't need to refresh, or not everything needs to be new. You can repeat things. You can use a piece of repertoire in a different way. You can use something from a previous year, use it in the same way, or use it in a different way, or use the same manipulatives for a different song and things like that. And when you start allowing parts of your curriculum to do double duty, that is where you get to reclaim your time. So when you're able to reclaim your time by doing all sorts of different things, including reusing and refreshing your lesson plans from previous years, that's really where you get to choose how to spend your time. And for me, I've spent that time, well, first of all, doing that music teacher and creating this wonderful community that I get to be a part of. But also I've been able to, I haven't written a lesson plan outside of school hours in years. And I know that's not common necessarily, but the reason that it's been able to work for me is because I put that time in the first few years of my career, so that I didn't have to put the time in now. Because for me, what I want to do spending my time outside of the school day is helping other music teachers like you make their instruction better and help reclaim their time. but also spend time with my family. I have a foster kid sitting or sleeping upstairs as I'm recording this, and something that I really wouldn't have been able to do if I had to create and bring a lot of lessons home, or if I was just kind of had to spend all of my time reinventing the wheel rather than using bits and pieces and parts and ideas from previous lesson plans. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of That Music Podcast. If you haven't already, I would love to invite you to join us inside That Music Teacher community. You'll find the link in the show notes wherever you're listening. But That Music Teacher community is a one-of-a-kind music education community specifically for elementary music teachers. On top of the actual community aspect, like where we get to post questions and help each other out, you'll receive a monthly professional development masterclass that gets added to our growing library of content-specific professional development for elementary music teachers. Again, you can find that link in the description or the show notes wherever you're listening, and we would love to have you inside if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this week's episode, it would mean the world to us if you would leave a review wherever you're listening. That really helps us understand what types of episodes are resonating with you and really helps us grow the podcast and find more music educators just like you that are trying to take back some of their outside of the music classroom without sacrificing the instruction that's happening inside it. Like always, I want to be the person that in case nobody has told you that, and I want to thank you for making a difference in the lives of the students you teach, because you truly are doing that for hundreds of students every single day.